Moist, 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 etc. Welcome to How to Write Good. I am your host, Daniel Poppie. You can find out more about me at danielpoppie.com. If it is your first time here, How to Write Good is a writing podcast that seeks to find principles and advice that can be applied across a broad range of writing situations. If you've been here before, don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button below, and share. So here's a question. Should you use the word very in your prose? Or should you pull up a list of all the things you can replace the word very with and replace it with phrases that every other person on earth who speaks English is using? Now, the first thing doesn't sound very cool because very is an overused word. People use very because they can't think of another word that they should be able to use. But I don't think that the second way sounds very cool as well. And the reason why is because if you are drawing from the same well everyone else is drawing from, your writing is going to look like everybody else's writing. It's going to sound like everybody else's writing. It is going to not have its own style. And I think it's very important that it has its own style, or you might call that style voice. We need to develop our own style and our own way of writing. And it does take time to do that. People have words that they don't like. And if you don't like a word, you don't have to use a word ever. Now, I don't like really long words because even if they have a very specific meaning, right? I'm not trying to use that ironically. It requires the reader to pull out a dictionary. Though I'm not opposed to pulling out a dictionary when you're reading. I think it's actually good if you're writing and it just comes out, right? If you know the word well enough that you can use it in your speech, right? Or it just comes out naturally when you're writing. I think it's different than if you're just putting a long word in to try to convey a very specific type of definition. Because most people don't understand these difficult, really long words. People run into them. They think, what does that mean? I don't know what that means. Okay, I'll read on. Some people will pull out dictionaries and then they'll be like, oh, that's what that word means. That's pretty cool. But the goal of the writing is to have people understand what you're writing. And I think that the long word does convey a specific meaning, but it isn't as vivid in most cases in the reader's understanding, in the reader's mind, if that makes sense. So if I could replace a long word with a few shorter words that paint a picture instead of just sticking a long word in, that's something I would do in my writing. But this is just a rule, a style guideline that I have in my own writing because I find that I think readers are more engaged when I don't do that. I do use long words, right? If you read my writing and you're not someone who reads tons or you're not someone who writes a lot, you'll probably find words you don't understand. And I use those words for very specific reasons. And I believe those words are the best words to use in that specific case to convey what I'm trying to convey. But you will find instances where you won't understand what I'm writing, and it's probably the case that I'll find instances where I don't understand what you're writing either, okay? So I'm not opposed to using long words. I just think that in some cases it seems like certain writers will use a long word or they'll use a word that is unknown to try to convey something specific, but they've lost the reader because the reader doesn't understand that word. So the reader reading the book, they have to break from their reading, which I think is one of the worst things that can happen because a book is meant to flow together, if that makes sense. But when we look at writing, when we look at word usage, when we look at how to put together phrases or things that are cliche, should we have a blanket rule to not use specific words or cliches or phrases, etc.? Honestly, that would seem short-sighted. To me, that seems short-sighted that we would say, hey, you can't use this word, you shouldn't use that word. If I ever run into this word, I'm going to say that the writer isn't as good as this other writer. It is kind of an odd rule because word usage does matter in writing, but it doesn't matter in the way people think, okay? So you could be the best writer in the world and use the word very in a way that is very good. You can use the word very in a very appropriate way. Okay. You could use the word very, and then the person who's reading it, who is just a regular reader, they'd read it, everything would flow together. They would have a very pleasurable time. I'm not trying to use very a lot, but it's just coming out. They would have an extremely pleasurable time, and because they do, they wouldn't even notice the word. The word would actually make the writing better. But there are certain people, and I'm picking on people who have an issue with the word very, which includes Mark Twain, I believe, who have an issue with very, so they wouldn't use that word in their writing because they want to avoid that word, though that word would be the best choice in whatever that particular context is. That's a long way of saying, if you get rid of specific words, if you have words that you won't use, it might be the case that you're missing out on using that word in places that they would be extremely useful. So I think it's short-sighted to just disqualify a word just because we don't like it. Our goals should not be to follow what other people say we should or should not do, first of all. If someone says, you shouldn't use the word very, therefore you used it this time or that time and it makes you a worse writer. First of all, if your writing flows, if it goes together well and you happen to use a word very, but it doesn't take anything away from the writing, then I think that isn't an issue. Now, there is an issue with using a word over and over and over again, or not having a large enough vocabulary, or not knowing how to put words together, not knowing sentence construction or paragraph construction or how a story flows, etc. But our goals should not be, as I said before, to follow what other people say we should do or should not do within our writing, because we may find that our style of writing is something that a lot of people like. It's something that really connects to people. And if we always follow what other people do, we're not going to find that. If we always follow what other people do, we'll do what other people do, if that makes sense. Our goals are to write as well as we are able to write, and they might require using words we blacklisted in certain situations. If you enjoyed this podcast and you want to support me, there's really one simple thing you can do. You can go to danielpoppie.com/newsletter and sign up for my newsletter. And when you sign up, you'll actually be able to get access to my publication roadmap. So that's everything I have planned for pretty much every project I have into the next decade. Again, that is danielpoppie.com/newsletter. You can also find the link below.